Get ready to dive into a journey through the mysterious and revealing writings of Nag Hammadi. Did you know that what we know as Christianity is just the tip of the iceberg? Since the discovery of these ancient texts, researchers have been perplexed to find that the Christian tradition we are familiar with is only a small fraction of the many teachings that existed in antiquity. Imagine a world where questions about suffering, work, and death are not answered with original sin, but with a profound search for transcendental knowledge. This is what the Gnostic Christians, whose ideas were considered abominable by the Catholics of their time, expressed in their writings. For them, ignorance was the true root of the problem, and gnosis, or knowledge of the reality beyond the mundane, was the path to true understanding. In this video, we will explore these intriguing differences and their implications for understanding Christianity. Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more revealing content, share it, and leave us your thoughts in the comments. Together, we will unravel the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of what we thought we knew. Don't miss it. Both the Nag Hammadi library, discovered in the 1940s, and other Gnostic texts discovered during the 19th century, such as the Bruce Codex or the Gospel of Mary, have been the subject of numerous investigations. Scholars have come to a general consensus about Gnosticism. This was a widespread movement in the origins of Christianity that drew on sources from various traditions. These include esoteric Judaism, Pythagorean Platonism, Hermeticism, and Indo-Iranian religiosity present in documents such as the Avesta, the Upanishads of India, the Gathas hymns in the Persian world, in the Persian Pahlavi treatises such as the Bundahizn or the Denkart, which, although they were reworked in the 9th and 10th centuries AD, they preserve remains of very ancient beliefs prior to the appearance of Christianity. However, scholars have delved into the cultural context and experiences that led to the development of Gnosticism. Thus, Professor Grant has suggested that Gnosticism arose as a reaction to the destruction of traditional religious ideas, both Jewish and Christian, after the Romans razed Jerusalem in 70 AD. Gilles Quispel, a friend of Jung's, proposed that Gnosticism had its origin in an experience of the self which is potentially universal expressed through a religious myth. Hans Jonah describes Gnosticism as a kind of worldview, drawing a parallel between Gnosticism and existentialism. We, of course, do not share this parallel, although we agree that the spiritual circumstances that led to the spread of Gnosticism in the origins of Christianity share similarities with the current situation. The British scholar Dodds characterized Gnosticism as a movement whose writings come from mystical experience. Gershom Scholem, the eminent professor of Jewish mysticism at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, agrees with Dodds that Gnosticism involves mystical speculations and practices. Scholem draws parallels with esoteric currents in contemporary rabbinical circles that he calls forms of Jewish Gnosticism. Carl Gustav Jung, in a letter to J.E.B. Lang, refers to Gnosticism as follows. I very much agree with you that we have to engage with the knowledge contained in Gnosis and Neoplatonism, for these are the systems which contain the proper materials to form the basis of a theory of the unconscious spirit. For my part, in 2002, in an article entitled Psychology and Astrology, I referred to the fact that the unconscious is Gnostic by nature. This claim was based both on my research into Jung's psychology and on my own experience of descending into the unconscious. Since the discovery of Nag Hammadi's writings, researchers have come to the conclusion that what we call Christianity today and identify with the Christian tradition actually represents only a small selection of sources, chosen from dozens of them. Certainly, what the Gnostic Christians expressed in their writings was an abomination to Catholic Christians. Questions such as what are the causes of suffering, work, and death, which for the Gnostics did not reside in original sin, but in ignorance, or rather, in the lack of gnosis or knowledge of the transcendent reality. The Gnostics expressed that there is a feminine element in divinity, so that God is father and mother. For the Gnostics, the resurrection of Christ must be interpreted symbolically and not literally. Moreover, for some Gnostics, as the Apocalypse of Peter testifies, Catholic Christians did not possess gnosis, so they do not understand the mystery, and yet they boast that the mystery of truth belongs exclusively to them. Some scholars believe that Catholic Christians' opposition to the Gnostics' views was due to religious and philosophical reasons as well as social and political ones. And this is because religious discrepancies carry crucial social and political implications for the development of Christianity as an institutional religion. Thus, those groups of people who expressed ideas that had implications contrary to the institutional development of Christianity were considered heretics or heterodox, while those who supported it were considered orthodox. In this sense, the insistence of the second-century Orthodox that the resurrection of Jesus should be interpreted from a literal point of view, rejecting all other interpretations as heretical, was not only dogmatic, but also political. Such an interpretation legitimizes the authority of certain men who claim to exercise the exclusive direction of the churches as successors of the Apostle Peter. From the 2nd century onwards, doctrine has served to validate the apostolic succession of bishops, being the basis of papal authority to the present day. Thus, the Gnostics who interpreted the resurrection from a symbolic point of view and understood it as the process by which the pneumatic acquired gnosis were denounced as heretics and thus disavowed from the Orthodox perspective. In fact, for the Gnostics, the literal interpretation of the resurrection of the body was the faith of fools. In the treatise on the resurrection in the Nag Hammadi library, a teacher turns to his disciple and says, "Do not suppose that the resurrection is an apparition, a fantasy. It is not an apparition. Rather, it's a real thing. Instead, one should maintain that the world is an apparition, rather than a resurrection." The teacher, therefore, explains to the disciple that ordinary human existence is an illusion, i.e., spiritual death, and the human being who thus lives is a living dead. For this reason, he goes on to say that the resurrection is the revelation of what truly exists, and a migration, a change or transition, into novelty, the next. In the Gospel of Philip, another document in the library of Nag Hammadi, a similar idea is expressed when it says, "Those who say that they will first die and then rise again are in error. They must receive the resurrection while they are alive." Therefore, what is fundamental for the Gnostics is the experience of the resurrection, not as an event that happened to the historical Jesus, but as the possibility of experiencing the resurrection in the present. With these few examples, we can see that the Orthodox position was based on public, exoteric teachings that Jesus and the apostles offered to the many, while the Gnostic teachings, in addition to public teachings, offered an esoteric, secret knowledge, known only to the few. And here we come to a crucial issue. I believe that, in addition to the political and social consequences of both approaches, based on very different experiences, a new element must be introduced into the equation in order to understand the bitter reactions of the Church Fathers against the Gnostics and, in general, against every heterodox position. The idea that the Gnostics express about the anthropological differences between the Hylics, the Nazis, the psychic, and the pneumatic. This distinction lays bare a hierarchy in the attainment of gnosis, so that it is only granted to an elite. The rest, no matter how hard they try, will never obtain gnosis because it does not depend on the will, the intention, and the supposed merits of the person, but, as we explained in one of our previous videos, it is produced by the nature of the Gnostic and not by his conduct. The idea that there is a group of people who are chosen by the Father or the Transcendent to be saved, while others will never be saved no matter how hard they try, has always provoked contrary reactions, such as mistrust, hostility, marginalization, and persecution, usually due to misunderstanding, envy, rejection, and fear. And this is not only within a religious institution such as Christianity, but with modernity and postmodernity. Both socialists and communists reject any spiritual hierarchy, emphasizing equality and the abolition of all forms of leadership based on spiritual superiority as a consequence of initiatory knowledge, because they see it as a form of inequality and injustice. Hence, Carl Gustav Jung states on page 272 of the chapter Present and Future of the book Civilization in Transition the following. The communist revolution has debased men even more than the collective democratic psychology by robbing them of freedom in a social, moral, and spiritual sense. Regardless of the political difficulties, the West also has a great psychological disadvantage that became apparent in the era of German National Socialism. Now the shadow can be pointed at with the finger, and of course it is clearly in the country on the other side of the political frontier, and of course we are on the side of good. Jung evidences here an attitude that can be extended to all socialist and communist regimes, which has come to be called moral superiority, and which has the great disadvantage of singling out and criminalizing the political adversary. The danger lies, as Jung points out, in the fact that these ideological attitudes through which man rids himself of the spiritual and moral adversary that dwells in his own chest end up provoking psychic pandemics that spread through the mass media and social networks related to the political regime. For the psychologist, this is the expression of a division between the rational consciousness of man and the other man who dwells in us, whom Jung calls shadow, a division that threatens to take hold of an entire people. Despite the fact that this psychic split of contemporary man has already demonstrated throughout the 20th century the danger it poses, one continues to imagine oneself to be harmless, reasonable, and humane. But the crucial question of how the inner man behaves in relation to what we do externally remains unanswered. That is why Jung warns that it should be worthy of our greatest attention, especially today, when the fate of the future depends neither on the threat of wild animals, nor on natural disasters, nor on pandemics, but solely and exclusively on psychic changes in men. It only takes an almost imperceptible disturbance of the balance of a few leading heads to plunge the world into blood, fire, and radioactivity. Both sides already have the necessary technical aids. In view of what is happening in Europe, not only with the expansion of the materialist ideological program called the 2030 Agenda, but above all with the still active conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Jung's last words are relevant today. Thus, in the face of the disorientation of the consciousness of contemporary man, it is not surprising that the experience alluded to in the text discovered in the sands of Nag Hammadi today takes on an unsuspected topicality. As we have said before, Jung came to the same conclusion. In fact, he claimed that the perception that consciousness is lost in our world today is related to the evolution of the human spirit over time. As humanity advanced in its mastery over nature, there was an increase in confidence in scientific and technological knowledge, which led to a disregard for the natural and random aspects of existence, including the unconscious psyche, which is distinct from consciousness. While consciousness is subjective, the unconscious is objective and manifests itself through feelings, fantasies, emotions, impulses, and dreams that are not consciously controlled, but emerge spontaneously. Today, psychology focuses predominantly on the contents of consciousness that can be measured and evaluated according to standardized, collective criteria. The individual, subjective experience of the mind, which is fundamentally real to each person, has been relegated to the background. Moreover, the unconscious, which manifests itself in non-rational ways, has been largely ignored. This neglect is not simply a lack of attention or knowledge, but an active resistance to acknowledging the existence of another source of psychic influence alongside the conscious self. It is threatening to question its primacy. However, religiously inclined people often accept that they are not the sole authors of their decisions and believe that it is ultimately a higher force, such as God, that guides their actions. But in today's context, how many people are truly willing to cede control to a divine force? And who is comfortable explaining the extent to which a decision is actually guided by that upper force? The modern understanding of the religious man reveals that he is influenced by reactions from the unconscious. This phenomenon, commonly identified as consciousness, is rooted in the same psychic substrate that can generate reactions that are not necessarily moral. For this reason, the believer evaluates his conscience using traditional ethical criteria, relying on the structure and teachings of his church. As long as the individual remains steadfast in his or her traditional faith and circumstances do not demand greater individual autonomy, the situation can be stable. Today, however, the emergence of externally oriented individuals who have lost their religious conviction has significantly transformed the landscape. Believers are compelled to defend and justify their beliefs, as the suggestive influence of collective consensus has diminished due to the institutional weakness of the Church and the questionability of its dogmas. The Church responds by recommending an increase in faith, as if this spiritual gift depended exclusively on human will. Modern research on Gnosticism and mystical traditions in general suggests that true faith does not originate in mere consciousness, but in spontaneous religious experiences that directly connect the feeling of faith to a transcendent reality. In the case of Catholic Christianity, it faces contemporary challenges due to increasing secularization and the diversity of beliefs in society. For its part, Islam, while also confronted with issues of modernity and extremism, maintains a vigorous and growing presence in many regions of the world, reflecting different dynamics in the relationship between individual faith and community. Thus, religious experience in the contemporary world is at a tipping point, where both Catholic Christianity and Islam and other religions must adapt to changing realities, maintaining the balance between tradition and the demands of individual autonomy and critical thinking. However, the question of religious experience admits of only one answer, and that is that man is willing to comply with the requirement of rigorous self-knowledge, that is, authentic gnosis, as we have defined it in the chapters on Gnosis and Jung. A man who has access to the spiritual experience of immediate relationship with the divine spark that dwells in the depths of his psyche will have an unshakable certainty which, as an individual man, will protect him from dissolution into the mass man. And we are attested to this experience by the Gnostic texts of the Nag Hammadi library, whose content acquires an even greater interest and relevance than at the time when Jung manifested it, in the first half of the 20th century. And this is as far as we have come in this fascinating journey towards the origins of Christianity, in which we have shown how today we find ourselves in a change of consciousness at a planetary level, that is, in a change of era. We have also seen how this spiritual situation actualizes interest in the origins of Christianity and, especially, in the spiritual experiences that the Gnostics describe in the manuscripts discovered, not by chance, between the 19th and 20th centuries. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the influence of the unconscious on religion, the impact of Gnosticism, and the current situation of Catholic Christianity and, more generally, religions in the contemporary world. We hope this video has given you new perspectives and insights. If you like the content, don't forget to like it. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future videos, and share this video with friends and family who may be interested. We'd also love to hear from you and open a space for dialogue, so feel free to leave your comments below. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.